then I'll open it up for questions again. So for closing this out, we've been part of this party all day and I appreciate it. Before I leave the stage today, I wanted to talk about a couple things around procurement, regardless of whether it's a public work, services, or piece of equipment. A couple things to think about. So one of them is amending a contract that's already been awarded for a certain contract value. So there's nothing in statute anywhere that says is there's some sort of dollar limit where I don't add more money to my contract. But this is one of those policy recommendations that come up with a process where you will only do over a certain value before you'll do a separate procurement process for something. So you want to think about that before adding new work, because I think where this comes into place, things like services contracts, right? And for your team, this comes in a lot because you don't have things in policy for as far as your bid limits. Or other entities, this is very important because if they have certain bid limits and things, but no one has bid limits in services. So this is generally comes up in services where I've got the service contract and I want to extend it another year, even though I don't, didn't go out to market for it. Well, is there a certain dollar amount once you award a contract where you don't just automatically extend it? So that's something you want to think about. Maybe you have a policy on that. The other one's the old change order. Well, you want to have a policy around this too, because you should have a policy that addresses big changes in scope, right? You look at the scope of what you went out to market for and awarded that contract for. So the thing to think about here is changes in scope basically mean if it's not in the scope originally, it's its own thing. It's its own potential contracting opportunity, right? If it's not in that scope, it probably needs to be done on its own. Because then the flip side of that is if you didn't have it in your scope to begin with, you don't want to just add it to that vendor's contract, especially if you bid that project, because those other bidders that could have provided your pricing didn't have that opportunity to bid it either. Getting late in the day, I lost my train of thought here. Sorry about that. What you want to do too, you may want to specify in your policy too that any change order goes to your board to award, even though it wasn't part of, if it was under that dollar amount where your board didn't need to see it, maybe on change orders, you want them to approve that. Just as another level of due diligence, like, hey, we made a change to it. We felt it was in scope and our board approved it as well as an additional step to make sure that you can show on your due diligence and compliance with your agency policies. And the last one I'm going to give you federal funding. So if you got a project that has federal funding and you're trying to figure out what are the limits I need to consider on this, once you set your own policy and you've got federal funding, you have to compare both because you have to take the most stringent policy that exists, move forward on that. So let's look at the federal policy and your own. And hopefully MRSC will help with that once we get this new tool out there that'll list all the, the limits and all those things you have to look at in those federal contracting spaces. You made it to the end of the day. So give yourself a round of applause. I do want to talk a little bit about day 2 just to get some thoughts. I can tell you what I'm intending and then get maybe some raise of a hand, some feedback. For tomorrow, what I'm intending to do to start our morning is I was going to come up with a few different projects and certain things are going to happen within those projects. I'm going to give every table just something to figure out based on this scenario, what would you do? Kind of talk through it. Just to give some people some different scenarios and we can just talk through what the things we observed today. What did we take away to kind of work through some different things? That'll be the first part of the morning. And then I had the questions that were submitted to me in advance. So I'm going to cover those if I didn't cover them in the session today and talk about those and also get some time if people want to ask more questions after you've had a chance to think through what we talked about today. Now, the third piece I thought I would add that I hadn't thought of yet, but we talked about like the small works legislation that just came out recently. Would this group like to see some of the other legislative changes that are coming from this session? If I show of hands, anyone want to see what's changing in the space? Because some of it doesn't directly apply to you, but it might just be good awareness, like what's changing in the statutes. Okay, I'll put together just a short thing, like here's some policies and things that are changing in statute that you should be aware of. So I'll do that as part of the session too. Is there any closing questions for the day that I can answer for anybody? All right, so I think I'm a little bit ahead of time, but I also don't want to, I want to give people time and make sure that I've addressed all your questions. So I wanted to make some space in today's session to do that. And I got some great questions today, and you've given me some homework, which is always, to me, a good indicator that we had a good back and forth in our session. So thank you. And Mike?
I don't want to. So back in the public works,
Mhm.
you talked a little bit about.
Yeah.
Can you? My understanding is that there are some requirements in order to deal with those.
Yep.
Those. Can you maybe touch a little bit, like if someone wanted to look, we have districts considering by building buildings.
Yeah.
And the design building and stuff like that. What would be good for the group to know about different, what process is involved in doing?
Yeah. So when you were doing those alternative processes, what's important to know about those is, with the exception of job order contracting. So if we're talking about the design build or the GCCM, general contractor, contract manager, you have to get approval from the contract review advisory board on those. So you have to go in front of them and get approval to meet those projects. So that's a process, and there's certain restrictions for each type that you have to seek that approval for, and it's based on dollar limits too. So those are the things to know about those specific ones. So that is a good piece to add into that. So why they're not as widely used, but to do them, you do have to seek project review board approval before moving forward with them. Right. So I'd say some of the minimums to think about, first one is services, right? Services for anyone around the state, wide open, except for in A&E services. The thing you have to know on those is you have to do qualification based when you go make a selection. So no pricing involved. So in services, and the minimum is qualification based only as you make your source selection. To make that determination of who you then negotiate price with, that is a must. Now in the public works space, what's the must have? I'd say like the quick must-haves there in public works are that you must have plans and specifications, right? You've got to have prevailing wage. And retainage is involved unless you waive it. So you're always going to have retainage unless it's waived in statute. And you're going to have bonds, performance and payment bonds required in that too. So those are always going to be part of a public works project, no matter what you do. So those are the pieces that no matter what you're doing, those are what you need to have as you do those functions and buy things. And then in equipment, it's pretty wide open too, because it's not really, because you get to set how you do it. So there really isn't a real requirement there, but that you have to have like a method. So like in services, it's pretty wide open. In equipment is pretty wide open. But public works, there are some definite, yes, you must have these every time you do a public works project. Prevailing wage, retainage, and performance and payment bonds. Yep, and the only other caveat I say in public works, all those pieces, and you need to follow the small works provisions too, because if you adopt the small works roster, what's unique about that, there is limits set in small works statute. So you have to follow those, because if you're adopting the process, the limit is there, it's in the statute itself. And it's like I said, it's going to change too, but there should only be 2 then after next year. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, just make sure Josh took really good notes. Call him and ask him how to do it. That's the deal. And I do want to thank you for all the hours you here to
And that is a service I provide, so that, anytime you have a specific question. Yeah, so we actually have the Ask MRSC on our website. And so what happens is, so I want to talk about Ask MRSC because we have a little bit of time about our services too. So Ask MRSC is on our website. So not just sending a question to me. If you have a finance question, something that seems like it's a planning question, or even a legal question, you can use the Ask MRSC. And honestly, I'd ask too, if you have a question for me, please use the Ask MRSC, because what it does is, in case I'm at a session like this and I know I'm going to be out for a couple of days, someone else sees your question, they can always step in and back me up too. That way we make sure we cover it and get back to you and answer your question. But that's a free service that you can use. The other thing I would just talk about with a couple minutes about our program too. Say the Josh sales pitch here, but so we talked a little bit about the MRSC program, the rosters program. So that's, there now, and like I said, it's going to be the statewide roster in a year. But in addition, I touched on it briefly in the morning session about we've had rosters in place for quite a while, but in the last year, we've also offered this electronic bidding platform. And why it's really cool is that I found myself working at an agency to go to electronic bidding. While it makes the process really easy, it's very cost prohibitive. I think our assessment was it would cost an agency about $12,000 to go buy an off-the-shelf, bidding platform and go do it yourself. So we've heard from a lot of smaller jurisdictions that, hey, it'd be great if we could do electronic bidding because it just refines the process, makes it much easier. So we did research this last year and talked to a lot of electronic bidding providers. And we said, here's what we're looking for. We want to be the main contract holder and hold the main account, but we want to get a smaller licensing fee that they join into our account so we can make it more cost efficient for our local government entities that may not have the resources to do it on their own. So we work with Bonfire. And so we're the main account holder, but we offer seats to that electronic bidding platform. We have basically it's a price only setup. So it's a tailored down version of their big full implementation platform. So you could use it like for a small works roster because it just sends you back a price only bid and it just tabulates it for you, tells you who the winner is. Sends out, you can pull the roster list and send out an email notification through the system. And then everyone will just respond to the bid platform. So that's $2,500 a seat, pays for the whole year per user. So that's something we were excited about. We just launched it at the beginning of this year. So that's a new program that we offer. So that is the limitation on it because we tailored it down to just do the price only, thinking a lot of our users wanted to be able to go out and do low bid. So we wanted to make sure it's as cost efficient as possible. Now, as an entity, you can decide Bonfire can work with you to give you the full array of services. They do offer the full platform that can do RFP, IFB, but we tailored it down to make that cost more effective for our customers to be a price only platform. Okay. So basically some of the elements that you'd see in an RFP, some standard. Yeah, there's some different elements to that one. Yeah, there's some examples in our template library. Overall, I'd say yes, because we have a template library that has a lot of those different types of documents. I don't know if I'll have the time to go through specific ones. Would it be helpful if I showed you where we have a lot of those? I could just do a quick overview of some of the things we have on our website. I actually have yeah, how would I add? I actually have a version of that I've done, so I can add that in tomorrow. I can show you, here's some of the things, some tools you can use on our site. Okay, I can add that. Absolutely, I appreciate the ideas. I'm making this tomorrow's session's yours, so yeah, I can bring in an overview of like different things we have available. Yeah, what I'm thinking about doing, I'll maybe pull some roles and responsibilities guidance we've given in the past on that. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna make a note on when I go over the MRSC resources and see some checklists. So that might be my intention. I'll see if I can figure out this. I can even go real time and show you where some of the stuff is. Okay, yeah, for sure. See how technology savvy I can show my screen and get through all that stuff, make that happen. And then maybe too, I'll give you some insight on some. Oh, you had a question. No worries, no worries. Well, so you actually have the ability, because of your statute, to set your own policies on that. So you're gonna have to, I always say you have to go back to your policy. What do you say you intend to do? So no. So the question was, is there a state requirement for board approval? And the answer is no, because you get to set your own procurement policies of how you make a purchase. So I always revert, you have to go back, especially as a conservation district, you have to go back to your policies and procedures before you make a purchasing decision, make sure it's in alignment with what you say you intended to do. So one of the things I was going to share too is there's some things that are coming soon at MRSC. And I can touch on it again tomorrow too, but in this last year, we had some funding to enhance our public works resourcing. So we went around the state and we did about 7 sessions in person for public works, and we hired a consultant to come in and just give an overview. She was a practitioner and both in the private sector and public. So she shared a 1-day presentation on public works. We also hired Mike Purdy this year. He's been in the public works space for a long time. He put together a public works best practice guide. So we're in the process of getting that under final edits. So that's going to be available this summer. So it really just goes through all these different elements that we talked about today as a guide. And it's based on Mike's experiences during his many years of public works contracting. So he wrote a compilation from all the different blog posts he's done over the years and gave us an overview of all the things to think about in public works. It's pretty awesome. And then the other thing, Mike, you talked about is alternative public works, because there's not a lot of things out there. We've been working with the state auditor's office in addition to the federal funding this last year, adding that to the contracting tool. We're also building an alternative delivery topic page, talking about, what are all these things and and all the factors. So we're going to put that as a topic page as well later this year. It should be ready, I think, by in June. So very close. There's a couple of projects I've been part of in this last few months. So some new things coming that are really going to support all the work you're doing out in the conservation districts. I've really enjoyed the sessions today. I've had some great conversations, learned a lot of things. Really appreciate everyone's feedback, giving me a lot of things to take back, even to provide and give me some feedback of how I can, enhance the time we're going to spend tomorrow. So with that, thank you for spending day 1 with me. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Well, great. So we're on tap for 8:30 in the morning back here. So have a great evening. I would say